Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into today's story. As the evening dragged on, the awkward silence between Linh and Hoang seemed to deepen. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the room, but neither of them seemed to take comfort in its warmth. Linh sat across from him, her mind racing with thoughts she didn't know how to process. It had been an exhausting day, filled with tension, uncertainty, and an undeniable pull she hadn't expected to feel toward the man she had once despised. After all, what did she really know about him? He was always so distant, so cold. Yet, in that fleeting moment earlier when he had draped his jacket over her shoulders, something had shifted. She tried to shake it off. There was no room for confusion. She wasn't here to get involved with him, not in any way that mattered. He was still the same arrogant, self-absorbed man, right? Linh wasn't about to let herself get pulled into some fantasy just because he had been nice for a second. But then, Hoang spoke. "You've been quiet. Are you upset about something?" His voice was surprisingly soft, without the usual edge of indifference. It was almost concerned. Linh couldn't place it. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "I'm fine," she replied, though the words felt hollow. She wasn't fine, not really. She was more confused than ever. Hoang didn't respond right away. Instead, he took a long look at her, almost as if he were searching for something in her eyes. His gaze lingered, and for a moment, Linh thought she saw a flicker of vulnerability there, something she had never expected from him. He quickly looked away, breaking the moment before it could go any further. "All right," he said, standing up abruptly. "I'll go check on the fire outside." Linh watched him go, the tension between them palpable. What was that? Why had he looked at her like that? Linh sat there. For a while, lost in thought. The evening had taken an unexpected turn, but she couldn't figure out what was really happening. What had started as a forced weekend together, filled with frustration and animosity, had somehow become different. It was subtle, but she could feel it, and she hated it. The next morning, Linh woke up early, determined to clear her head. She needed some space to think. As much as she wanted to avoid Hoang, the truth was, she couldn't stop thinking about him. She dressed quickly and headed outside, hoping the fresh morning air would help her regain some clarity. The morning mist hung low over the forest, and the air was crisp, biting at her skin. She walked aimlessly for a while, letting the silence of the woods calm her. But her peace was short-lived. Hoang was there, too. He was standing by the lake, his hands shoved deep in the pockets of his jacket, staring out at the still water. For a moment, Linh considered turning around and walking the other way. She didn't want to deal with him right now, but something kept her rooted to the spot. She hesitated before finally approaching him. "You know," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I didn't expect this weekend to be so complicated." Hoang turned toward her slowly, as if surprised she had spoken to him at all. "Complicated?" he repeated. "What do you mean?" Linh took a deep breath, trying to figure out how to explain the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. "I didn't expect to feel like this. About you. About us," she said, her voice quieter now. Hoang's eyes softened, but his expression remained unreadable. "I didn't expect it either," he said quietly. The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable, each of them searching for the right words. Finally, Linh broke the silence. "I don't know what's going on between us," she admitted, "but I don't want to ignore it anymore. I can't." Hoang's gaze met hers again, this time with an intensity that took her breath away. For the first time since they had met, Linh saw something other than detachment in his eyes. There was pain there, a flicker of something deep, something raw. "I don't know what it is, either," he replied, his voice low. "But I know I don't want to pretend it doesn't matter." They stood there, staring at each other, the weight of their unspoken words hanging in the air between them. Neither of them moved, neither of them could speak. They were both trapped in this strange limbo, unsure of what to say or what to do next. Lin's heart was pounding in her chest, her breath coming in short bursts. She wasn't sure if it was from the cold air or something else, but the tension was thick enough to feel like it could suffocate her. Without thinking, she took a step closer to him. She didn't know why, but it felt like the only thing she could do. Hong didn't move away. Instead, he took a slow step forward, closing the distance between them. They were standing so close now that Lin could feel the heat of his body against hers, and her breath caught in her throat. The world seemed to fade away, the only sound the rush of her heartbeat in her ears. She didn't know how it happened, but in that moment, it didn't matter. Huang's hand gently cupped her face, and before she could stop herself, she found herself closing the gap between them. The kiss was tentative at first, soft, as if neither of them were quite sure they should be doing this. But as their lips met, something inside Lin shifted. The kiss deepened, and with it, everything she had been trying to suppress came rushing forward. The feelings, the confusion, the attraction, it all collided in that one, perfect moment. When they finally broke apart, they both stood there, breathless, eyes locked. Lin didn't know what to say, neither did Hong. But somehow, everything between them had changed in an instant. It wasn't the end of the story, but it was a beginning neither of them had anticipated. The morning after the kiss was one of the strangest Lin had ever experienced. The awkwardness between her and Hong was undeniable, but there was something else, too. A strange sense of tension, a pull between them neither of them knew how to handle. As the day progressed, it became clear that things were not going to go back to the way they had been before. The kiss had changed everything. Lin couldn't stop thinking about it, but she wasn't sure what it meant. Was it just a moment of weakness, or had something deeper begun to stir between them? The questions raced through her mind, but the answers were nowhere to be found. Hong, for his part, had been unusually quiet. Since that moment by the lake, he hadn't said much, almost as if he were waiting for Lin to make the next move. It was strange, this silence between them. Usually, she would have enjoyed it, would have used the time to clear her thoughts. But now, it felt like there was too much unsaid between them, too much left hanging in the air. As the afternoon sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the cabin, Lin found herself standing at the window, staring out at the distant mountains. The view was breathtaking, but she couldn't focus on it. Her mind was elsewhere, on him. She didn't know what she was supposed to do next. Hong had been distant as usual, but she couldn't help but wonder what had happened to the man she had kissed earlier. Was that Hong, or was that just a fleeting moment? She wanted to believe it was the real him, but how could she know for sure? The man she had known before was not someone who let his guard down easily. And yet, in that one moment, he had. Lin sighed, pushing away from the window. She needed to get out of her head for a while. She decided to take a walk to clear her thoughts, hoping the fresh air would help. But as soon as she stepped outside, she saw him. Hong was standing by the cabin's porch, looking down at something in his hand. She hesitated, wondering if she should turn around and go back inside. But before she could decide, he looked up and caught her gaze. His expression was unreadable. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, Hong put the object in his hand down on the railing and walked toward her. "Lin," he said, his voice low and calm, but there was something in it, something raw, something that made her heart race. "Can we talk?" Lin didn't know what to say. She nodded, stepping toward him, her heart pounding in her chest. As she approached, she could feel the distance between them growing smaller with every step. It wasn't just physical distance, either. It was as if everything that had been unspoken between them in the past few days was finally coming to the surface. Hong stopped just in front of her, his eyes searching hers. "About what happened earlier," he began, his words tentative, almost cautious. "I don't know what it means, but I can't stop thinking about it." Lin swallowed hard, her throat dry. She wasn't sure what to say. Was he feeling the same confusion she was? Was he as lost as she was? "I don't know either," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it feels like everything's changed. I don't know how to process it." For the first time, Lin saw the walls around Hong crack, just a little. His eyes softened, and he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I've been trying to keep things under control, keep myself in check. But with you," he trailed off, as if unsure how to continue. Lin's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the intensity between them growing, the magnetic pull drawing them closer. The emotions were so strong, so overwhelming. She wasn't sure if she should give in or pull away. But she couldn't pull away, not now. She didn't want to. Hong reached for her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. The touch was gentle, but it sent a shock of electricity through her body. Lin looked up at him, her heart racing, and for a moment, Everything felt suspended in time. She could hear her own breathing, but everything else seemed to fade away. And then, without thinking, without second-guessing herself, she kissed him again. This time, the kiss wasn't tentative. It wasn't a fleeting moment. It was real. It was raw. The emotions that had been building between them erupted, and Lin felt as if her world had tilted on its axis. Her mind was spinning, her heart was pounding, and yet, in that moment, she knew she couldn't deny it any longer. She was falling for him. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathless, their eyes locked in a moment of understanding. There were no words, no explanations needed. They both knew what had just happened, and they both knew that there was no going back. But neither of them was ready to face what came next. They were standing on the edge, unsure of where the fall would take them. All they knew was that they couldn't stop now. The days that followed were a blur for Lin. The kiss with Hong, the one she had never seen coming, lingered in her thoughts like a ghost, haunting every corner of her mind. She tried to push it aside, to pretend it hadn't happened, but every time she saw him, the tension was undeniable. There was a shift between them now, something both unfamiliar and exhilarating. The awkwardness was still there, but beneath it, there was a new kind of energy, an unspoken connection that neither of them could ignore. The cabin, once a place of forced discomfort, now felt different. The walls that had seemed so cold and oppressive now felt strangely intimate, filled with the possibility of something neither Lin nor Hong fully understood. But what was this something? Was it just physical attraction? Or was there something deeper? Lin wasn't sure what she was feeling, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't deny the pull between them. Hong, too, seemed to be wrestling with his own emotions. He was still distant, as always, but there were moments, brief, fleeting moments, when his walls would crack. Like when he'd catch her gaze and hold it for a little too long, or when he'd offer a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, as if he were trying to hide something. Lin couldn't help but wonder what was going on inside his head. What was he thinking? And why couldn't he just be honest with her? But every time she tried to get close to him, he would retreat again, like a tide pulling away from the shore. It was maddening. Lin found herself standing by the window again one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. She had always loved sunsets, the way the colors seemed to bleed into each other, creating something beautiful and fleeting. But tonight, the beauty of the moment was lost on her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away. Just as she was about to turn away from the window, she heard a voice behind her. "You're thinking too much again." Lin didn't need to turn around to know it was Hong. His voice was familiar, and though it was as indifferent as ever, she could hear the underlying concern in it. She didn't answer right away, unsure of what to say. She had been thinking too much, that was true. About everything. About him. About the kiss. About what was happening between them. And yet, no matter how much she tried to convince herself to forget it all, she couldn't. "I'm fine," she said finally, her back still to him. I'm trying to figure things out." There was a long pause, and then she felt him move closer. "Figure things out?" he repeated, his voice low. "What exactly are you trying to figure out?" Lin turned to face him, surprised by the intensity in his tone. For a moment, she couldn't speak. What was she trying to figure out? The question seemed so simple, yet it was the hardest one to answer. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, unsure of how to put her thoughts into words. "I don't know," she finally admitted. "I guess I'm just confused. About everything." Hong didn't say anything for a moment, his gaze locked on hers. Then, almost reluctantly, he spoke. "I'm confused, too." Lin blinked, surprised by his honesty. She hadn't expected him to open up like that. Hong, the man who was always so guarded, always so distant. He was actually admitting that he didn't have all the answers. For a brief moment, Lin felt a flicker of hope, but it quickly faded, replaced by the realization that even if they both felt the same confusion, that didn't make things any easier. "What are we doing here, Lin?" Huang's voice was quieter now, almost hesitant. "What is this between us?" "Because I don't have a clear answer, and I don't think you do either." The words hit Lin harder than she expected. She hadn't realized just how much she had been hoping for answers, for clarity. But now, standing face to face with Hong, it was clear that neither of them had figured anything out. They were both lost in the same tangled mess of emotions, unsure of where to go next. Lin took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I don't know, she said softly. I don't know what this is, but I know that it's something. Hong studied her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers as if looking for some kind of sign. Then, he reached out, his hand brushing gently against hers. The touch was simple, yet it carried so much weight. Lin felt her heart race, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. Maybe we don't need all the answers right now, Hong said quietly. Maybe we just need to figure it out together. Lin's chest tightened at his words, and for the first time since they had arrived at the cabin, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. She didn't have all the answers, and neither did he, but maybe that was okay. Maybe they didn't need to have everything figured out. Maybe, for now, all they needed was each other. The moment stretched between them, filled with the weight of unspoken words. Neither of them made a move, but the distance between them seemed to vanish. In that moment, Lin realized something. Whatever was happening between them, whatever this was, it was just beginning. The days following that moment between Lin and Hong felt like they were suspended in time. They hadn't spoken about what had happened, but it was clear that something had changed between them. The air was thick with unspoken words, with both of them avoiding the obvious question, what now? It was a strange kind of tension, neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, but undeniable. Lin tried to keep herself busy. She spent her days exploring the nearby woods, walking along the trails, anything to avoid the growing feelings she couldn't quite understand. But every time she came back to the cabin, there was Hong, quiet, distant, as if nothing had changed. Yet, she could feel it. The way his gaze lingered on her a little longer, the way he was no longer as dismissive. He wasn't the same man she had met days ago, and neither was she. The evening air was cool, and the sound of crickets filled the silence. Lin found herself standing by the porch once again, staring out at the darkening sky. The sun had set, leaving behind a deep purple hue. Her thoughts were a whirlpool, spinning faster than she could process. What was she doing? What was this thing between her and Hong? She didn't know the answers, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't keep pretending it wasn't there. The sound of footsteps behind her interrupted her thoughts. She didn't need to turn around to know it was him. Lin, Huang's voice broke through the quiet. It was soft, almost hesitant, a tone she had never heard from him before. She turned to face him, her heart quickening at the sight of him standing there, looking unsure of himself. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension was thick, and Lin could feel the weight of it pressing down on her chest. We need to talk, Hong said, finally breaking the silence. Lin nodded, her mouth dry. She didn't know what to say, but the words felt like they were coming whether she was ready or not. About what happened between us, he added, stepping closer. His eyes searched hers, as if looking for something. Lin's heart raced. I don't know what happened, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't understand it, but I can't stop thinking about it, about you. Hong took a step closer, his expression softening. I can't stop thinking about you either, he said quietly. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Lin's breath caught in her throat. She had never imagined hearing him say something like that. Hong had always been so guarded, so closed off. But now, in this moment, he was letting her in, and it felt like everything inside her was unraveling. I don't want to keep pretending that nothing's happening, Lin continued, her voice trembling. I don't know where this is going or what it means, but I don't want to ignore it anymore. Huang's gaze softened even more, and for the first time, Lin saw vulnerability in his eyes. The walls he had built up over the years were crumbling, and he was letting her see the real him, the part of him he had kept hidden for so long. I don't know what to do with all these feelings, Hong said, his voice low, almost uncertain. But I know that I don't want to be without you. I don't want to go back to the way things were before. Lin could hardly believe what she was hearing. It wasn't like Hong to be so open, so raw. But in that moment, it felt real, and it felt right. I don't want to go back either, she whispered, her heart pounding. And then, without thinking, she reached for him, her hands trembling as she touched his chest. Hong didn't pull away. Instead, he placed his hands on her shoulders, his touch gentle but firm. He leaned in, and Lin met him halfway. Their lips touched again, and this time, it was different. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. It was the kiss of two people who had been holding back for far too long. The kiss deepened, and Lin felt her body relax into his embrace, as if everything she had been fighting against was finally falling away. The world around them disappeared, And all that mattered was this moment, this connection they shared. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless, their faces inches apart. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Lynn's mind was a whirlwind, her heart still racing. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. This was no longer just a fleeting moment. Whatever this was between them, it was real, and they were in it together. Hoang's eyes searched hers, and for the first time, there was no distance between them. No walls. No pretenses. Just the two of them, standing on the edge of something neither of them could predict. I don't know where this goes, Hoang said quietly, his voice steady. But I'm willing to figure it out. With you. Lynn nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. I'm willing to figure it out, too, she whispered. And for the first time since they had met, she felt like they were on the same page, ready to face whatever came next, together. The following days felt like a whirlwind for Lynn and Hoang. They were no longer just two people thrown together by fate. Something had shifted, and now, they were trying to figure out what that something meant. The air between them felt different, charged, but fragile. It was like walking on a tightrope, each step taken carefully, unsure if they were about to fall or soar. Lynn tried her best to focus on the present, but it wasn't easy. Every glance from Hoang, every word he spoke, felt like it carried so much weight. She had always been independent, used to navigating her own emotions, her own life, but now, she felt like she was treading in uncharted territory. The kiss had changed everything, but it had also raised 1,000 questions. What were they now? Where was this headed? Was it just a fleeting moment, or was there something more? It wasn't just Lynn who was wrestling with uncertainty. Hoang was quieter then. Usually composed exterior cracking just enough for Lynn to see the vulnerability hiding underneath. He wasn't the man he had been when they first arrived at the cabin, distant, aloof, and emotionally guarded. No, now there was a new depth to him. A hesitation, a softening in the way he looked at her, as though he was still trying to figure out how to navigate this strange new connection between them. One evening, as the sunset bathed the cabin in soft golden light, Lynn found herself once again standing by the porch, looking out over the vast expanse of the forest. The wind was gentle, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth, and for a moment, she felt at peace. But that peace was quickly shattered when Hoang appeared, his silhouette framed by the door. He didn't say anything at first, but the weight of his presence was enough to make Lynn turn around. She hadn't expected to see him standing there, and yet, there was something about the way he stood there, quiet, just waiting for her to acknowledge him. Lynn. His voice broke the silence, low and steady, as though he had been holding back something for a while. Lynn met his gaze, her heart skipping a beat. We need to talk, Hoang said, his voice almost hesitant. About us. About what's happening between us. The words hung in the air, and Lynn felt a sudden tightness in her chest. She had known this conversation was coming, but she hadn't been ready for it. She wasn't sure if she was ready for it now. I don't know what's happening between us, Hoang, she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. But I can't ignore it anymore. I can't pretend like everything's fine when I know it's not. Hoang stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. Neither can I, he said softly, taking a deep breath. I don't know what to do with all these feelings. They're overwhelming. Lynn swallowed hard. She felt it too, the intensity of the emotions swirling between them, the way everything had shifted so suddenly. I've spent so much of my life keeping everything in control, Hoang continued, his voice raw, as though he were finally allowing himself to be vulnerable. But now, I don't know what to do. I don't know if this is just a passing thing, or if this is something real. Lynn took a step toward him, her heart racing. I don't know either, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. But I want to figure it out. With you. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken emotion. Hoang's hand reached for hers, his touch gentle but insistent. Lynn felt her pulse quicken as their fingers intertwined. It wasn't just a simple touch. It was a promise, unspoken but understood. I don't want to let go of this, Hoang murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Lynn looked up at him, searching his eyes for any sign of doubt, but there was none. There was only certainty now, a quiet confidence that had replaced the uncertainty that had plagued both of them just days before. Neither do I, Lynn whispered. Hoang leaned in then, his lips brushing against hers in a kiss that was soft at first, gentle, as though they were both testing the waters. But then, as if some invisible force had drawn them together, the kiss deepened. This wasn't the same kiss they had shared by the lake. This was more. It was full of longing, of years of suppressed emotions, of the quiet tension that had been building between them from the very first moment they had met. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless, their foreheads touching as they struggled to catch their breath. "What does this mean?" Lin whispered, her voice shaky with emotion. Hong closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to collect his thoughts. When he opened them again, he met her gaze with a new determination. "It means that I'm not running anymore," he said quietly. "I'm not running from you, from us, from what this could be. I'm willing to face it, no matter how scary it might seem." Lin felt her heart swell at his words. She wasn't sure what the future held, but in that moment, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't alone in this anymore. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The days after that pivotal moment felt both surreal and intense for Lin and Hong. The kiss they had shared had altered the dynamic between them in ways neither could have predicted. Despite the deep connection they had begun to form, there was still an undercurrent of tension that neither could fully understand or ignore. They had crossed a line, but what was on the other side? Neither of them had the answers, but the uncertainty was beginning to take its toll. Lin spent her days trying to keep busy, walking through the woods, thinking about what had transpired. But even as she tried to distance herself from the overwhelming feelings, she couldn't shake the pull she felt toward Hong. It was like gravity, strong and unyielding. Every time she was near him, the world seemed to narrow down to just the two of them, and everything else became irrelevant. Hong, for his part, was equally torn. He had always been the one to maintain control, to keep things at arm's length. But now, with Lin, it was different. He was struggling with emotions he had long buried, emotions he didn't know how to handle. He wasn't used to this level of vulnerability, and it scared him. But even as the fear gnawed at him, he knew there was no going back. He couldn't ignore what was happening between them, no matter how complicated or terrifying it was. One evening, as the sky turned a deep shade of purple and the first stars began to appear, Hong found Lin sitting on the porch, her head tilted back as she gazed up at the stars. She seemed lost in thought, and for a moment, Hong hesitated. He wasn't sure if he was ready for another conversation, but the pull between them was too strong to ignore. "Lin," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. She turned to look at him, her eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. "We need to talk," he continued, his voice filled with a mix of uncertainty and determination. Lin stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been expecting this moment, and yet, the words still felt heavy. She nodded, her gaze never leaving his. "What do you want to talk about?" she asked, her voice soft, but filled with a sense of urgency. "About us," Hong said, stepping closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "About what we're doing here, about what's happening between us. I can't pretend like everything's fine when I know it's not." Lin's breath caught in her throat. She had been thinking the same thing, but hearing it from him made everything feel so much more real. "I know," she whispered. "I've been thinking about it too, but I don't know what to do with all these feelings. I don't know where this is going." Hong reached out then, taking her hand in his. His touch was gentle but firm, as if trying to convey everything he was feeling without words. "I don't know where it's going either," he said quietly. "But I know I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose you." Lin looked up at him, her heart racing. She had never heard him say something like that before. She had always known him to be guarded, careful with his words and emotions. But now, in this moment, he was opening up to her in a way she hadn't expected. "You don't have to worry about that," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "I'm not going anywhere." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They just stood there, their hands clasped together, the weight of their unspoken feelings hanging between them. The night seemed to stretch on forever, but it felt right. There was no rush to resolve everything. No need to put a label on what was happening. They were just two people, standing together in the silence, sharing a moment of understanding. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that was enough. "I'm scared, Lin," Hong admitted quietly, his voice barely audible. Lin squeezed his hand, offering him a soft smile. "Me too," she said. "But I don't think we can keep running from this." Huang's eyes met hers, And for the first time in days, he smiled. A genuine smile, free of the walls he had built around himself. It was a small, but significant shift, a sign that maybe, just maybe, they were both ready to face whatever came next. Then let's not run anymore, he said, his voice full of determination. Let's face it together. Lynn nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. There was no guarantee of what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to take the next step, whatever it might be. And as they stood there, hand in hand, under the vast expanse of the starry sky, Lynn knew that this moment, this connection, was something worth holding on to. The days following, their decision to face their feelings together were a mix of uncertainty and excitement. Lin and Hong had agreed to take things one step at a time, to not rush into anything, and yet the bond between them seemed to grow stronger with every passing moment. There was a new openness between them, a shared understanding that neither had expected but both deeply appreciated. They spent their days together, talking about everything and nothing, laughing at little jokes, and sharing small moments that made the world seem a little less daunting. But as the days passed, the pressure of their unspoken fears began to weigh on them both. Lin couldn't help but feel the underlying tension that still hung in the air. What if this wasn't enough? What if their connection wasn't as strong as they hoped? What if they were both just searching for something they couldn't find in each other? The questions lingered, but Lin didn't dare voice them. She didn't want to ruin the fragile peace they had found. She was afraid that if they started asking too many questions, the entire thing might fall apart. Hong, too, seemed to be carrying a weight. He was quieter, more introspective, and there were moments when Lin caught him staring into space, lost in thought. He hadn't been this open about his feelings before, and the vulnerability he showed made her feel both close to him and distant at the same time. She wanted to reach out, to ask him what was going on in his head, but she didn't want to push him too far. She could feel him holding back, even though he had told her he wasn't running anymore. It was clear that something was still eating away at him. One afternoon, as the sun began to set and painted the sky in shades of gold and purple, Lin decided to confront the tension that had been growing between them. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when she knew it wasn't. She found Hong sitting on the porch, his legs stretched out in front of him, looking lost in thought. The moment she sat down beside him, he looked up, and their eyes met. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a shared awareness of the distance that had grown, even though they were physically closer than ever. Hong, Lin said softly, her voice steady but her heart racing. What's going on? I can feel something's bothering you. You've been so quiet lately. Hong sighed, rubbing his hand over his face. I don't know, Lin, he admitted, his voice low. I don't know how to deal with this. With us. I'm scared. Lin felt a pang in her chest. She had known it all along. The fear, the doubt, the uncertainty. It wasn't just her who was struggling. I'm scared too, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know if this is real, if we're just fooling ourselves. The words hung in the air, heavy and vulnerable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply sat there, side by side, the weight of their fears pressing down on them. Lin could feel the crackling tension between them, the uncertainty that neither of them could shake. But then, Hong turned to face her, his eyes softening, and he placed his hand gently on hers. I don't want to let you go, Lin, he said quietly. But I don't know if I'm strong enough to face this. To face everything that comes with it. Lin's heart swelled in her chest. She could feel the sincerity in his words, the vulnerability he was offering. She wanted to reach out, to reassure him, but she knew that wasn't enough. They both needed to confront the fear that was keeping them from moving forward. Hong, I'm not asking for everything to be perfect, she said, her voice soft but firm. I just need to know that you're willing to try, that we're not just walking away from this because it's too hard. Hong looked at her, his eyes searching hers for any sign of doubt. But Lin didn't hesitate. She was tired of pretending, tired of running from the feelings that had become impossible to ignore. I'm willing to try, he said, his voice steady now, a quiet resolve in his tone. I'm willing to face this, to face the uncertainty, as long as we're doing it together. Lin felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The air between them felt lighter, the tension that had once seemed unbearable now dissipating. She took his hand in hers, a sense of peace settling over her. Then let's do it, she said softly. Let's face whatever comes next, together. As the night fell and the stars began to twinkle above, Lin felt a sense of calm wash over her. For the first time since they had arrived at the cabin, she felt like they were on the same page, ready to take the next step, whatever it might be. The uncertainty wasn't gone, but it no longer felt like an insurmountable obstacle. They were no longer two people trapped in their own fears. They were two people, side by side, willing to face the unknown together. As the days went by, Lin and Hoang found themselves slowly but steadily moving forward, no longer stuck in the uncertainty that had once threatened to pull them apart. Their connection, though fragile at first, had deepened, and the fears that had once loomed large in their minds now felt less daunting. They had learned that there was no perfect path forward, no blueprint for how this should go. But there was one thing they both knew: they wanted to try. Together. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when the past would creep in, when old habits and insecurities would resurface, but each time they confronted them, side by side. It was a constant journey of learning to trust not only each other, but themselves as well. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, casting the world in a golden glow, Lin looked over at Hoang. The air was cool, and the rustling of the leaves in the trees was the only sound around them. She could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his presence beside her. A quiet peace had settled over her, and for the first time, she realized that she wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't afraid of the unknown, of what the future might hold. She wasn't afraid of the possibility that this might not last. Because, in that moment, she knew that no matter what came next, they had already faced the hardest part together. The unknown wasn't so frightening when you weren't alone. Hoang, Lin said, breaking the comfortable silence. He turned his head to look at her, his expression soft, curious. I just wanted to say thank you. For everything. Hoang raised an eyebrow slightly, clearly surprised by her words. For what? He asked. Lin smiled gently. For being here. For being willing to face this with me. I know it hasn't been easy, but we've made it through. Hoang didn't say anything for a moment. Instead, he reached out and took her hand in his fingers wrapping around hers with a tenderness that spoke volumes. I think we've both made it through, he said quietly, his voice steady. But we're still here. And that's all that matters. Lin nodded, feeling the truth in his words. It wasn't about having all the answers or knowing exactly where this path would lead. It was about being present, being real with each other, and choosing to move forward, no matter what. The weight of their pasts, their doubts, and their fears had not disappeared, but it no longer held the power it once did. They were building something new, something rooted in trust, vulnerability, and the quiet understanding that even when the world felt uncertain, they could rely on each other. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was real. What happens now? Lin asked, her voice barely above a whisper, but filled with hope. Hoang looked at her, his gaze steady, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in his eyes. Now, he said slowly, we take it one day at a time. Together. And whatever comes next, we face it. As long as we're facing it together, that's enough for me. Lin felt her heart swell at his words. They weren't promising forever. They weren't pretending they had all the answers. But in that moment, she knew they had found something far more important, an unwavering commitment to each other, to showing up, even when the road ahead was unclear. They didn't need to know what the future would bring because they had already made the most important decision, to face it side by side. The sun had set, the stars beginning to twinkle above them, and Lin felt a quiet peace settle over her. She leaned into Hoang, resting her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her own. And for the first time since they had met, Lin wasn't afraid of the future. She didn't know what would come next, but she was ready to find out, with him. As the night embraced them, the world around them felt vast and full of possibilities. But in that moment, nothing else mattered. They had each other, and that was all they needed.